I'm not going to lie to you. I listen to a lot of Canadian music. That is just a part of doing this job for a living. But even with that, it has been a genuinely spectacular year in terms of Canadian artists. You've had Tate McRae, you've had Justin Bieber, you've had Rebbenskirt, you've had William Prince. A lot of incredible records that came out this year in Canadian music. And the conversation you're about to hear is about those records, but it's also about the meaning of listening to Canadian music right now, because it feels different, right? It means something different. This idea of like, we started out the year with all these sort of annexation threats hanging around in the air. And then what you kind of end up with is this universe where actually the very meaning of the songs you're listening to is a little bit bigger. The idea that you're paying attention to Canadian culture and Canadian movies and Canadian music, that's a more significant thing. And so I was really excited to get into that with the panel that we have today. I hope that you enjoy this conversation. We'll talk to you in a bit. Natalie Harmsen is here, Riley Yesno is here, and making her Commotion debut, Erin Macleod. Erin, welcome to the show. How are you guys? Welcome.
We're great.
Good.
Hi.
Yeah.
Nice to have you here. On the way in, like literally on the way into the studio this morning, Rolling Stone posts, hey, here's the cover for January 2026, so the one that's about to come out, and it's Tate McRae. I mentioned her name off the top. That seems like, to me, maybe the best place to start. That's Sports Car. That song has been a little bit on repeat in my car. I don't have a sports car, but that's fine. That is from So Close to What. That album went #1 in Canada. It went #1 in the United States. It went #1 all over Europe. It just got Tate her first Grammy nomination.
Ooh.
Riley, I'm going to start with you. What do you make of the year that Tate's having?
Yeah, Tate McRae was my choice for Canadian Artist of the Year because I think that we're globally in a moment of like pop divas. Pop girls are running the charts. Chappell Roan, Sabrina Carpenter, Addison Rae, and
You left out a name, but it doesn't matter. Don't worry about it.
T Swift.
Yeah, there we go. Thank you. Yeah.
And I think that, if it's choose your fighter like style, that Tate McRae is Canada's.
Yeah.
And so one of the things that I love about her, and I think that, propels her to the top of that list for so many people, is not even necessarily the music, which is so catchy and I love it, but is her performance that sets her aside. She was on So You Think You Can Dance Canada when she was younger, right? And that translates so much into her stage show. She performed at the VMA Music Awards, and her performance of Sports Car is the most viewed of all of the performances. And she is the least listened to of monthly listeners on Spotify when it comes to the songs itself.
She's a spectacle.
Yeah. She's giving Britney Spears 2000s. And I think especially in this moment, for me at least, I feel like a callback generally to like recession pop right now, where we're in a recession in all but name. And I want music that makes me feel good. And so that's why I think also pop is doing so well and why Tate McRae is doing so well, especially in this moment.
Well, speaking of not only recession music, but also music that makes you feel good, one of our great pop stars has also returned this year. Have a listen to this.
If it ain't right, babe, you know I respect it. But if you need time, just take your time. Honey, I get it. Way you got me all in my head.
Natalie, should be illegal, I think, to listen to only like a little bit of that song. That is Daisies. That is Justin Bieber. The album is Swag. You were on the show when this album dropped. That was back in July. It's not, I think, uncommon for a record to come out and dominate the news cycle for a bit and then just kind of go away. That didn't happen with Swag because we got Swag 2, first of all, but also he just kind of like kept being around. Justin Bieber kept doing things. It was not clocking to me that he would do that, and then he actually managed to do it. And then today, CBC ends up naming Justin Bieber the Artist of the Year. Why was 2025 the year of Justin Bieber?
This is the omnipresence of the Biebs. He was everywhere. And I think he did that in a very unconventional way. So you have this large comeback. He hasn't released an album since 2021, which was Justice. Not his best work, in my opinion. And then you see him take this complete 180 with Swag and Swag 2.
His best work is such a generous thing to say.
It is. Yeah. But you see him take this whole shift and go this lo-fi experimental route, bringing in new collaborators like Dijon and McGee, and him embracing being a dad on this record. It's just checking a lot of boxes for, hey, I'm being experimental and trying something new. And I think that's such an exciting thing to see.
Yeah.
And it worked. It went to number 2 on the Billboard 200. You've got Daisies and Yukon, which took off exponentially. And then he got the 4 Grammy nominations.
Sure
so
did.
shout out to JB.
Fatherhood changes a man, you know? Me, I started wearing hats when I became a dad. Justin Bieber, he came back and made a record that, you know, four Grammy nominations. I also want to talk about an album that has been a little more idiosyncratic, but also there's something about the way that this record has been received, because as you get all these best of lists at the end of the year, this album has been all over it. Have a listen to this.
I've been this way circa 95. If I lie down in this life, would you mention me?
That's Lie Down. That's Saya Gray. The album is called Saya. Erin, what do you make of this record? Why do you think Saya Gray sort of managed to connect on such a wide scale?
I mean, I think sort of springboarding from the comment about Justin Bieber, you know, this idea of experimentation, I think that pop accessibility now kind of welcomes in experimentation. I think that that's what Saya Gray offers, this sort of combination of these two things that really, I think, draws you in. There's so many different things happening on the album. Obviously, the overall message of the album, it's a story about heartache, songs about heartache, which is relatable.
Yeah.
And she has all these different ways into that same topic. And I do know that everybody kind of has been talking about Lily Allen's West End Girl as sort of like the breakup album of the year.
And what an album that one was. But yes, 100%.
Yes.
Yeah.
But I see it as very much a West End Girl album. It's a musical almost of sorts. And this album, I think it does some of the same things, but I feel that it's a much more thought out, insightful, and artistic project that allows you to listen to it multiple times. I mean, I love the Lily Allen, but I've listened to more Saya Gray.
Okay, can I just say I'm surprised to be finding myself to be the person to do this at the end of the year, because Drake's stock has been, shall we say, not doing particularly great. But there is this one song from Drake that has kind of had this consistent presence throughout the year. Let's just hear a little bit of Nokia right now.
Hey. Is it Stacy? Is it Becky? Is it Keisha? Is it Ashley? Was it Danny? Is it Party? Where's the function? Where the function?
Where the F the function is a question I have asked maybe too many times, Natalie.
You know what?
In a year where, like, we know, like, Drake lost the beef with Kendrick had the multiple sort of, victory laps, and then he puts out Nokia, and this kind of steadily becomes one of the candidates of songs of the summer. Does it surprise you that even when he's kind of apparently kicked down, we still end up the year being like, Drake had one of the biggest songs of the year, actually? We kind of ignored that fact a little bit.
It doesn't surprise me, because if there's one thing about Drake, he will find a way to persist and be in the conversation, even if it's at a moment when it's kind of corny, because I think part of what makes Nokia work is that it's nostalgic. It's about having fun in the club with your homegirls. He's shouting out Wayne Gretzky. He's shouting out just having a good time. So I think that's kind of what makes it work. And it also does tie into the recession pop theme a little bit, where people want to forget about their problems and just dance the night away.
Drake did, in fact, manage to actually do that for us. Okay, we're going to move on from talking about some of the albums, so some of the big stories, and maybe the breakthroughs that we witnessed this year. I want you guys to have a listen to this speech right here.
I'm so proud to be an Inuk woman. I'm so proud to be singing in my language, and I would just like to say thank you to all the artists who accepted for me to translate their songs, who meant so much to us since the last 40 years. So, nakukmi marealok.
So that's Alyssa P. She's accepting the Juno Award for Adult Alternative Album of the Year earlier this year in Vancouver for her album Inuktitut. The whole album is an album of classic rock covers, sung entirely in Inuktitut. She did the arrangement, she did the writing. Riley, why was that moment such a significant moment for you?
I loved this last Junos for Indigenous people especially, because Elisa P won here, Snotty Nose Rez Kids won Best Rap Album, Diantha Edmonds won Best Classical Composition, and I think it's really amazing to see Indigenous people getting recognized for their contributions outside of also the Indigenous specific categories, which are important, and they serve a role to make space for people who have been long neglected, I think, in Canadian music. But that also now we're seeing they're getting recognized for the fact that Indigenous people are creating some of the best music coming out of this country, I think, right now.
Yeah.
And like, especially as a foil perhaps to this recession pop, like the songs that they're putting out are say something, and they say something across the board that I think are messages that we need to hear.
Yeah.
And so we also have this new guard coming up that I think is really exciting in Indigenous music, where we have Elisa P, Jeremy Dutcher, Snotty Nose Rez Kids that have been around for a
huge
bit.
record this year.
Oh my God, so good.
Yeah.
And then we have new folks coming also into the fold. So like I'm thinking of Tia Wood and younger Indigenous artists that are taking this up. So I've said this before, but I'm calling it again. Jeremy Dutcher is a prophet. He said when he won in 2020 that this was the Indigenous Renaissance we were about to see.
Yes.
And I think we might be at its height, right now, or seeing it reaching that height.
I would not be surprised if we get to the junior nominations whenever they're released, because the juniors are in March, and you end up seeing all of those names in album of the year categories, in songwriter of the year categories, because I do think that is actually this new William Prince record that just came out is that's a contender for album of the year for sure. Evan Rezka had this gigantic record that I was like, oh, this is the thing that I was looking for from this person. So I can't wait for that to get here. In the meantime, Natalie, I know you were very excited about this particular Indigenous group. Had a really big breakout year. Have a listen to this.
They want my status and they're getting my teeth. I want a breath of every breath that makes me. Not only know but really feel that I'm free. Not only know
That's Afrez from Montreal-based band Ribbon Skirt, led by the Anishinaabe musician Tashina Baswa. So that album, Bite Down, landed on the Polaris Music shortlist, and ends up being named Best Album of the Year by Exclaim. Comes at number 4 in CBC's list. What do you make of this band? This idea, okay, they just had such an immediate impact with the first album out the gate.
I think it's incredible. I think especially when we're talking about them in the context of Polaris, I think pretty much every other artist on that short list either had an EP already that had come out or an album, and they just came out of the gate with this phenomenal, vivid, very moving and fierce record. I mean, I think Tashina as a lyricist is phenomenal. I think we heard a little bit of that on Off Res, where she's singing, they want my status, but they're getting my teeth. That is something that grips you, it moves you. And the sound is just phenomenal. So I think they really got that acclaim, and then they were recognized by Stereogum and Pitchfork for that record. So I'm so excited to see them really just killing it.
100%. My name is Elamin Abdelmahmoud, and this show is called Commotion. Riley Yesno is here, Natalie Harmsen's here, and Erin Macleod is here. And we're talking about this year in Canadian music. Look, to go from Ribbon Skirt and the idea of being shortlisted for Polaris, they were just one of 5 nominees from Montreal. That's half the shortlist, Erin. That's wild. You are in Montreal. The city's obviously been a long time sort of major musical hub, but then you see this sort of short list that Polaris puts out, and you go, okay, something's happening. Something's happening in Montreal, in Quebec. How do you account for the fact that so much of the list came from Montreal and Quebec for this year's Polaris Prize?
I think Montreal does well when things are happening kind of in spite of things. I think of the post-referendum period that led to, Montreal becoming internationally known for a range of different bands. And I think that that's what's happening now. There's been a lot of venues that have shut down. There were parades this summer as it regards to kind of speaking out against noise abatement issues. And the language politics have become something, again, even in the past couple of weeks, Paul Saint-Pierre Plamondon, the head of the Parti Québécois, saying that the artistic sector isn't showing enough loyalty and is intellectually vacuous. As you could imagine, that's led to a reaction from a range of different voices across the artistic community. And so Montreal is sort of making its voice known in light of these increasing nationalistic types of sentiments. And I think that artists are speaking up against this and really wanting to demonstrate that, Quebec music is a range of different things. And I think an example of that, in light of some of this discussion over the past couple of weeks, a friend and artist, Poirier, he is a longtime electronic music producer. His most recent album is called Quiet Revolution. And he wrote something online to the effect of, please, can someone send this to PSPP, to the Parti Québécois? I am Québécois. This is an instrumental album with 4 different languages on it, and it is still Québécois. And that's the kind of message that I think Montreal is sending, that there's so much creativity. There's so much, Ribbon Skirt is an example, but Elle Barbara is another incredible voice from Montreal that I think deserves notice, and I could keep going and going. And I think it's really sort of this scrappy kind of nature that Montreal has, and that in the face of kind of an attempt at quieting Montreal down, it's louder than ever.
I was going to say, can I just ask you about that phrase that you just used, this idea of like doing well in spite of things? As just like first of all, who can relate? But also just in general, like that idea, that frame of when things are hard, when things feel particularly untenable, that's actually when the best art gets created. Is there like a history of this for Montreal?
I definitely think so. I mean, I feel that that's exactly when I think back to when I first moved to Montreal in 1995. And, there was this like real tension that existed. And, everywhere you went, different things were for rent, but there was really low rents and people could create. And there were so many different spaces where people were doing weird and wonderful things. And then that led to basically the world turning towards the Montreal scene in the early 2000s with the Wolf Parade, with the Arcade Fire, obviously, and all of the other bands that were around at that time. And then the rise of Pop Montreal as being one of the most sort of famous festivals in North America. So, and it keeps going, and it's going into more than almost 3 decades now. So I think that Montreal kind of is able to have this kind of resilient scene.
Right.
And it only makes you question, wouldn't it be so much better if it got the support that it deserves?
Riley, I want to ask you about this because first of all, you wear multiple hats. Some of the hats I don't love. For example, you're a Manchester City fan, and we're not going to fight about that on air, but you're also a political scholar, right? And so one of the things that I picked up from what Erin is saying there, this idea that politics actually ends up influencing the art that's around us. And as we spent this entire year talking about focusing on Canadian culture, do you find yourself and your listening habits a little bit different because of the annexation threats that we had sort of earlier this year? You're like, you know what? No, I'm going to pay attention differently. I will become the Tate McRae super stan that I was meant to be. Like, how does that change what you listen to?
Yeah, I mean, on a personal note, I think I tried more perhaps this year. Like, I made an effort, for example, to like listen to the Polaris long list all the way through, which is something I've only ever done maybe once before.
That's a long, long list, my dude. Yeah.
It's a long list.
Yeah.
And so like things like that on my end. But I just think that it's harder in a way to support Canadian-made music than it is to do things like pick up a label at the grocery store and just check, is it made in Canada?
Yeah.
And part of this is also due to like the economic evolutions we've seen that Erin was talking about, where venues are closing down. It's really difficult for Canadian, and some of these things are longstanding issues. Like it's very difficult for Canadian artists to tour this massive country. And I think that so much of what makes people like ride or die fans of music is seeing them live, being able to show up to a bar and just hear something that you haven't heard before. And if we're seeing venues that do that sort of thing and offer that service close down, then I think it's no surprise to me that maybe more people are just like, well, I'm going to listen to whatever's on the top 100.
Right.
And if we get some Canadians in there, we get some Canadians in there. So I think maybe Elbows Up hasn't extended extended the same way to music that we thought it would in other areas. But it's going to take something, I think, a little bit more deliberate on the part of the consumer in order to make that change.
Well, I also will say, like, it'll take a deliberate effort on the part of people who write about this. And that includes you, Natalie. Like, I mean, like, part of the job in general for you at CBC Music is to promote Canadian songwriters and Canadian musicians. But that job must feel a little bit different in a year like this. How do you think all of this sort of energy kind of boiled down to how you think about your job?
Yeah. I mean, I think for me personally, it feels like the stakes are a little bit higher because you just really want to fight the good fight for the incredible artists who are doing their job in this country.
Right.
But I think especially what you said about live music definitely resonated with me this year. In general, I try to always see a lot of local acts, but I think especially I was conscious of it in 2025.
Yeah.
I mean, I saw Charlotte Day Wilson earlier this year. It was phenomenal. I go and see local jazz musicians at Listening Room Toronto. Shout out Listening Room Toronto frequently. I saw Pup earlier in the summer. So there's just been so many great hometown acts that have had this moment. Even seeing the Beaches came back and played Scotiabank Arena, and they've had that crossover success this year. So I think just that effort that I have been putting in to personally just show love to Canadian artists is really what has made it feel just a little bit more special this year.
Every time I see Natalie walking down the halls, I go like, Natalie, what do you listen to? Because she's got her headphones on, and she'll always name an artist that I've not heard of, and I got to go look them up and go, okay, now I'm also in love with this artist. So it's, you know what? It benefits me as well. Erin, you literally wrote a big feature about all of this sort of conversation just recently. So you wrote this piece for The Walrus. The headline was, Amid by Canadian, Should We Listen to Canadian Too? But one of the things that you're sort of working through that piece is that actually it's a bit more complicated to sort of say, listen to Canadian music, because there's all different kinds of things that go into defining what Canadian music is. It's not as simple as being like, I will choose to listen to Tate McRae over Taylor Swift. So do you want to talk a little bit about what goes into this idea of listen Canadian?
Sure. I mean, I think what it means to listen to Canadian music is asking the question, how do we identify it? How do we categorize it? And it's not just as easy as like, let's look for the maple symbol on the back of the CD. We have to think about what it means. Yes, exactly. Like we have to think of what it means to get into this whole like jingoistic elbows up, let's all listen to Canadian music, because how we define Canadian music is really quite fraught. When we say it's important to listen to it in the face of, the language of annexation, let's say, we have to be conscious of how all of these attempts at protectionism, like CanCon regulations, et cetera, the Quebec government's types of protectionist measures, tend to risk putting Canadian music in a box. And that box often ends up looking very white, very male devised, very cisgendered. And so we have to kind of ask that question as to when we're talking about Canadian music, we have to expand that box and really think about the huge variety. It's a huge country with a huge variety of music. And so that is something that we need to think about too.
I've loved this conversation. I don't want it to end, but also I'm conscious of the fact that before we let people go, I would like some recommendations from each of you. Something that you're like, you know what? You should go start here in terms of Canadian music for this year. And Natalie, I'm going to start with you, pal. What do you got?
Oh, I mean, I kind of already touched on it, but Pup, Who Will Look After the Dogs? I love that record. I think it's phenomenal in that they've managed to keep this thread of existential dread really running throughout the entire project and still having that signature humor, that grit. And if you get the chance to see them perform it live, it's just really going to bring that frenetic, crazy energy that only they can do.
Okay, before we go on to the next recommendation, we obviously have to play just a little bit of Pup. Let's hear it right now. Sometimes you make an incredible album of being like, am I aging? Is aging hard? And you end up making an absolutely perfect record. That song is called Hallways. Erin, over to you, pal. What's your recommendation? What do you got?
My recommendation is Spooky Rubin, Toronto, You've Changed. I think that Spooky Rubin is one of the most interesting Canadian indie success stories of like the past 30 years. He's our Mr. Bungle, I think. And I really think he's emblematic of a time when there was so much cool independent Canadian music, when you'd watch Much Music, stay up late for Indie Street, that moment in time when Toronto was still affordable. And I feel like Toronto, You've Changed captures where a lot of people are at now. It makes use of some of the sounds that were so amazing in his debut 30 years ago, Modes of Transportation, which is also a great record. And on the album, in addition to it being great song after great song after great song, he does this fantastic English language version of a song by Julieta Venegas, who's a Mexican indie pop singer from the early 2000s. Her song is called Lento. He does a version in English called Say, reflecting the fact that he lives in LA now. He's also very big. He's also very big in Japan. That's another important thing to know about Spooky Ruben. And it's just spectacular.
Beautiful recommendation. And then Riley, you are going to take us home, pal. What do you got?
All right. I sourced some recommendations from friends on Instagram. And so if you want to know what people in my circle are listening to,
ready.
Nemesis came up huge. If you haven't listened to them, you have to. Tobias Jesso Jr., Looney was another one that came up. But I also want to give my personal highlight. It goes to Sarah Kay, who's Thunder Bay born and raised. Shout out Thunder Bay.
Yes.
Opening for Ace Anabi this weekend at the Thunder Bay Community Auditorium.
Amazing.
And I think is only going to get bigger from here. Is working with Evan Red Sky. Their song, Do You Think of Me, is like a country pop sort of
You had me a country,
ballad.
by the way. Yeah, okay. Yeah.
And you know, they were listed on CBC's top 100 artists of the year. So
incredible. I appreciate you guys being here. This has been wonderful. Thank you so much for your time. What a delight. Thanks again.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Of course.
You.
Riley Yesno is an Anishinaabe writer and researcher. Natalie Harmsen is an associate producer here at CBC Music. They were both with me in studio. And Erin Macleod is an arts and culture writer in Montreal. My name is Elamin Abdelmahmoud. This show is called Commotion. And hey, we'll see you tomorrow.